Welcome, everyone. I'm here for the fireside chat with Chris Ballance. So, Chris, first of all, can you tell us more about IonQ and some of your latest achievements in quantum computing?
Absolutely. So, IonQ is a full quantum solutions provider. We operate in quantum computing, quantum networking, and quantum sensing. We work with customers from players like national labs through to people like AstraZeneca, people like NASA, people like Airbus. And we have quantum computers deployed across the world on customer sites. And we also work across air, sea, land, and space. So right now, we have multiple satellites with our technology on orbiting around the world, and our quantum sensing platforms on various different government satellites in space right now. And my job as president of quantum computing is running the quantum computing division. So my background is technical. I worked in quantum since before it was cool. My first job in quantum was in 2009. I set up a research group at the university focusing on some of the core elements of the technology. Back in 2019, I started up a company, Oxford Ionics, which started commercializing this technology. And my company was acquired by IonQ over the summer to bring this all together into a world-leading quantum platform where, based on chips built out of standard semiconductor fabs, we can build chips that not only perform better than anything else out there, they leverage the trillion-dollar investment in the semiconductor industry to allow us to scale faster.
Thank you for that. So we're talking here to talk about quantum computers. So I think, first of all, for the audience, let's sort of define apples as apples, oranges as oranges. What is a quantum computer?
So that's a really good question. It's easy to look at quantum computers as being just a faster version of a classical computer, but that just ain't so. Quantum computers are around 70 years behind classical computers, right? We're never going to beat NVIDIA by going head-to-head and tackling the same problems. What quantum computers allow us to do is tackle problems in completely different ways. So quantum computers are the most powerful form of compute that the laws of physics allow, and allows us to tackle problems using much, much more efficient algorithms. So what this means is that for a quantum computer that is the size of a few server racks and that draws less power than an electric kettle, we can outperform a supercomputer that would take millions of years to solve comparable problems. So it's just a very different way to allow us to solve very different types of problems. And it turns out these kind of problems are incredibly valuable. They range from things like breaking cryptography through to drug discovery, through to aerodynamics, many of the world's toughest problems right now that we currently can't solve on computers and can't ever expect to solve on computers, we can solve on quantum computers efficiently.
Thank you for that, Chris. So the thing is, quantum computers have been around for quite a while. The whole ethos about it, I've been writing about quantum computing since 2014. It's quite a long time. But we still don't have a ginormous amount of clarity about quantum computers, which type of quantum computer is, we haven't had a maturity yet in the industry where we've, one particular type of quantum computer has been established as the true leader. And so obviously there are, being developed currently, there are light particle quantum computers, there are trapped ions quantum computers, there's superconducting qubits, and nitrogen vacancy centers in diamonds. And different parts of the industry, including quite large companies, have vastly differing views on what a quantum computer should be. So, Chris, I believe that you feel trapped ions are the only way forward. Tell us why.
So perhaps taking a step back, we're at the end of the beginning now in quantum. A lot of people will talk about the science and the very technological underpinnings of how these things work. And whenever you're talking about the underlying basis of the technology rather than the value you're generating to the customer, you're always before the beginning. Where we are now, with at least trapped ions, is that we have the fundamental scientific uncertainty out the way and the fundamental engineering uncertainty out the way. So really the challenge of building a quantum computer is that the world isn't quantum. The reason it took us so long to discover quantum mechanics is that as a human, you don't see quantum mechanics out there in the real world. So the challenge of building a quantum computer is finding a technology where you can protect this incredibly fragile quantum stuff and then use it to compute. So you need to build something that can control these incredibly fragile quantum states and where you can scale it efficiently. And that scaling challenge is where the field has been stuck for the last decade. How do you find the technology you can mass manufacture that doesn't require lots of PhDs to fiddle and tune and love a system where you really can just stamp out these devices? So what we do is we use individual atoms, which we rip an electron off to make trapped ions, at which point we have an electronic technology. So we can then use a chip that we build out in a standard semiconductor fab that looks much the same as a conventional computer chip from a high level. And then we can use the electronics in the chip to trap these individual atoms about a hair's width above the surface of the chip and control them. So this sounds like science fiction, but it works incredibly reliably. And what we've now shown is that we can perform operations in these devices built out in standard semiconductor fabs alongside chips for laptops and high-performance computers, and that these chips now perform better than anything else out there. So better than anything else out there is good, but it's not necessarily great. But importantly, we've now hit the performance milestones on these chips that we need to scale all the way out to millions of qubits devices. And to give an idea of perspective, with a few hundred qubit device, you'll be able to outperform our best extrapolations of classical computers over the next 1,000 years. So this technology now works at the performance levels we need to rapidly scale, and it's an engineering challenge. So an engineering challenge is the end of the beginning, right? All trillion-dollar companies are built by solving hard engineering challenges. But what this means, we're now at a position where we can rapidly scale up this technology. So it's the end of the beginning. And the time for quantum computing is now.
So, but in the industry, there's still a lot of different pockets of research from different universities around the world where they say, we've made a breakthrough, we've created this special gate, we've created this special fault tolerance for the computer. Because since you guys have done the first mass-producible chip, does that also, would that be plugged into a classical machine, or would that be plugged into a quantum computer but only a trapped ion one? Or is that something that could work across the industry regardless of the chosen tech?
So these chips we build are the core of our technology, and the way you should think about quantum computers is much the same as a GPU cluster for machine learning or AI right now. You know, some customers want to access these things via the cloud. Our products are already available by all of the major clouds, so you can log in right now onto AWS and run stuff on our quantum computer. If you're fast, you could probably do it before this talk ends. But at the same time, we also deploy onto customer sites when we have customers who want to run very heavy computational jobs and want that. So really, you should think of these things, these deployments on customer sites look like a cluster of racks. So they look very similar to how you conventionally think about high-performance compute right now.
So basically, in my journey reporting about quantum computing, I've been told many different things by different researchers. Originally, I was told that quantum computers were going to be like AWS or IBM Watson. It was going to be a big central data center, and we were all going to dial into the data center. We were going to rent a bit of time, like you do with AWS, do a bit of computing, and then log back out again. And then in more recent years, I've been told that a quantum computer will be the size of a room or the size of one floor of a building, and that would be in, say, a bank. Might be able to afford to have an on-premise quantum computer. So what of, looking at those visions, do you think that that's looking realistic, those things, or are you envisioning something different when it comes to real-world quantum computers?
So I think a lot of this depends on the underpinning technology. One of the big advantages of the technology we've built out is that we can build chips the size of a thumbnail that operate these devices. You then have a lot of stuff around this to operate the chip, but a lot of stuff here is a couple of server racks, not a room, not a warehouse. And if you speak to some people in the quantum computing space, they will say it doesn't matter, you just need to hit the ultimate performance. But I think anyone in the technology space knows that technology performance is something that gets you in the door. It's your ticket to start the race. But what really matters is the very unsexy unit economics. And where we can get to by producing these chips, using the trillion-dollar advantage of standard semiconductor fabs, is that we can build this technology incredibly cheaply. And to give an idea of this, if we look out to our ultimate very large-scale devices right now, these are systems that will outperform our wildest dreams of computers right now, far bigger than the largest supercomputer clusters out there in terms of performance. Those systems, in terms of bill of materials costs, we're at low double-digit millions. a lot of our competitors, if you look at IBM's publicly stated plans, they estimate that in time they can get their unit economics down to something like $1 billion. So we can deliver this technology at something like a 30x cheaper cost, and we see no reason why that won't continue going down over time as we scale up production.
So Chris, I think you mentioned earlier that you were doing some very interesting projects, both with the German cybersecurity agency and with AstraZeneca. Tell us more about that.
Yeah, so what's incredibly exciting about quantum computing is it allows us to solve problems we can't solve any other way. And there's a couple of great examples of this. Perhaps I'll start off with AstraZeneca and then talk a little bit about Airbus, then a little bit about cybersecurity. So with AstraZeneca, over the summer, we put out public information that showed we could speed up some of their drug discovery workflows by 20x. So taking a problem that they could typically solve in months and solve it in days using a combination of GPU compute as well as quantum compute. So with the integrated solution we built out, we showed we could take this small molecule drug synthesis problem, which typically people would go and do in a lab. So you're talking about a large group of people running chemistry repeatedly to test stuff. And with quantum computing and the technology solutions we have, you can go from having to run these things in a lab environment to running them on a computer. And this is incredibly exciting since this is something we know we cannot do with a classical computer. People have been trying for decades and decades to make more and more efficient algorithms. And a lot of high-performance compute time right now is spent solving these problems. And we demonstrated a substantial speed up in that using our current technology platforms today. Another platform we're working on is with people like Airbus on aerodynamics. Right now, the limiting cycle rate in building a new aircraft is how well you can model out the fluid dynamics. And you might think we do this all on computers now and just simulate it, but that just ain't so. Right now, you simulate it, you get pretty close, and then you build a couple of meter scale model that goes and spends a month in a wind tunnel modeling it. With quantum computers, we can more efficiently model these kind of problems and expect to take the cycle time on design iterations from the order month of building a model and putting it in an incredibly expensive wind tunnel into something we truly can run on computers. And then all the way to the other end, talking about size and weight and power, a project we have delivering to the German cybersecurity agency, Cyberagentur, is a small size-optimized quantum computer that's about the size of a domestic refrigerator and that runs on less power than an electric kettle, but at the same time will outperform the largest supercomputers to date that require a small power plant to power. And this is a theme that I think over the last few years people have been catching on more and more. One of the really interesting areas of competition for quantum computers isn't just raw speed. The raw speed is impressive, right? We can say we can solve problems in hours that would take a supercomputer a million years. But perhaps what's even more economically important is that we can solve problems using 0.1% of the power consumption of a supercomputer. And right now, if you want to go and build a GPU cluster to run your machine learning algorithms on, your AI on, you can buy the GPUs, you can find the space, you can build a building, but getting a power hookup, that's incredibly hard. This is why people like Microsoft have recommissioned 3 Mile Island to power their demand.
So do you think then that some of these other types of quantum computers will fall by the wayside then? What do you think the future is going to look like? Is it going to be a small fridge-sized quantum computer? Is it going to be a larger one?
I think it's going to be both. So yeah, I think what we know of any technology race is once you find the technology that's sufficiently good and you can invest in engineering to make it sufficiently better and improve it rapidly, you default win. When you have a strong edge on unit economics, you win. And then I think in terms of the size, different customers want different things. A lot of customers want cloud access. They need a lot of peak capacity, and they're happy paying a slightly higher total cost in order to get that in a hurry. Other companies, perhaps drug discovery is a good candidate here, have a very good idea of what workload they need to put through systems, and for those, inevitably, having systems on site gives them lower total cost of ownership across the solution space. And then there are another class of customers, and this is where people like UK national infrastructure, like we sell into the UK's National Quantum Computing Centre, or players like cybersecurity agencies, or certain types of medical applications where people absolutely need data sovereignty They absolutely want to have their own space with their own computer in, where they have a very hard air gap between their information and the rest of the outside world, and those very naturally need on-prem solutions. And right now, we can configure compute solutions that deliver into any one of those different platform cases by configuring our technology differently.
So you touched on something very interesting, which is you were saying about the power consumption. And obviously, in the UK, we've got a sort of what we're calling a sort of national AI strategy, which included the building of several more supercomputers. And sort of we have got new relationships with the likes of OpenAI, where the idea is that OpenAI will share their AI technology, ChatGPT technology, with the British government, and in exchange will allow them to use the downtime on the supercomputers when they're not being used by universities to compute problems to run agentic AI apps, probably. So eventually, if it is going to be the huge problem in AI, let's say, some people have been talking about this week about there could be an AI bust and boom. It could all go bust. But let's say it doesn't, or we still have some AI. Eventually, is there because of the huge amount of power consumption, risks, and costs, where we're having to talk about redesigning the national grid to enable enough power for cities as well as these huge data centers, do you think there might be a pivot towards quantum? And what might that look like? Because you're saying your solution would only be a couple server racks, so you still need a data center.
Absolutely. I think we can look in the near term, right, where we can't compete directly with NVIDIA. We don't want to, right? There are many problems we can go solve that you can't solve any other way. And when you can see a value gap between, say, teams of people working in a lab to build a chemical versus something you can do on a computer, that's a very clear way to get a lot of value generated. If we dream a little and look, say, 10 years into the future, one of the things we know is that power consumption cannot keep scaling the way it is right now. It's completely unsustainable. And to me, one of the most exciting things about quantum computing is it offers a whole new avenue to go solve these very large-scale problems that we know we want to solve, and that right now, when you just carry on extrapolating the power demand curves right now, we don't have any solution. And there are platforms out there that offer potential 10x, maybe even 100x power savings by using clever classical compute and highly optimized silicon, but otherwise doing machine learning the conventional way. But what we know is that quantum computing is the only way to get many, many orders of magnitude of power consumption. And this is what we need if we want to carry on scaling compute resources in the way we've seen create such economic value over the past decades.
Brilliant. Can we have a round of applause for Chris Ballance of IonQ? Thank you very much.
Thank you.